Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a big one. How did a global standoff that defined an entire century just end? And not just end, but end in this incredibly fast and dramatic way.
So, how does a superpower just disappear? That's really the question at the heart of all this. We're going to dig into our source material and follow the trail. All the pressures, the big gambles, and the revolutions that brought the Soviet Union to its knees.
Okay, so to really get how it all ended, we've got to rewind to the early 80s. This was a time of intense pressure. You had the two superpowers locked in what turned out to be their final high-stakes staring contest.
Right, so our sources really lay out these two clashing forces. You've got Reagan's America, which was all about ramping up the pressure with a super hardline stance on communism. And then you've got the Soviet Union, which, well, from the outside it looked mighty, but on the inside, it was starting to show some serious cracks, both economically and socially. And the Reagan administration really leaned into this. They cranked up the pressure in two major ways. First, they just poured money into the military. This basically dared the Soviets to keep up, something their struggling economy just couldn't handle. And then came the big one, the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI. You probably know it by its nickname, Star Wars. It was this wild, futuristic missile defense idea that just threw the tech arms race into overdrive. The USSR was forced to scramble, and the cost was just crushing. But look, outside pressure, that's only half the story. Because right then, a new leader comes onto the scene in the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. And he gets it. He knows the old system is broken. So he decides to take this absolutely huge gamble. His first move was something called Glasnost, which means openness. And let me tell you, this was a radical idea. For the first time in forever, people in the Soviet Union could actually talk about the country's problems. They could even criticize the government out loud. And right alongside that, he rolled out Perestroika, or restructuring. This was his big play to fix the totally stagnant communist economy. He tried to introduce some market-like ideas, to try and give it a jolt and get things moving again. Yeah, but here's the thing our sources point out. These reforms, they had this huge unintended consequence. It's like once you give people just a little taste of freedom and you admit the system has problems, well, they want more, a lot more. The genie was officially out of the bottle, and there was no way it was going back in.
So you've got this pressure from the outside, and all this change happening on the inside. It created this incredibly volatile mix. And it all leads directly to one of the most famous moments in modern history. The year is 1989. This is the flashpoint. This is the year that all those decades of tension, of division, of oppression, it all just boils over. And wow, does it do it in a spectacular way. And what's just mind-blowing when you look at this timeline is the speed of it all. As soon as Gorbachev made it clear he wasn't going to send in the tanks to shut people up, boom! Pro-democracy movements just exploded all across Eastern Europe. The dominoes fell so fast, one after another, leading up to that absolutely incredible night, November 9th, when the Berlin Wall, the ultimate symbol, finally came down. And the fall of the wall, that was really the beginning of the end. It wasn't just about Soviet control over Eastern Europe anymore. No, this was the opening act for the final collapse of the Soviet Union itself. So what was the final nail in the coffin? Well, our sources really zero in on three things happening inside the USSR that led to the final collapse in '91. First, the economy was just broken. It couldn't provide for its own people. Second, you had massive political corruption, and people had just completely lost faith in the Communist Party. And finally, the different republics inside the Soviet Union itself started demanding their independence. They wanted out. And this right here, this is the final dramatic scene. The Soviet Union is officially dissolved, and a brand new Russia emerges from the ashes. And that man is Boris Yeltsin. He's the one who famously climbed on top of a tank to stare down a coup, and he became the first president of this new Russia. Okay, so one superpower is just gone. And with that, the entire global map gets redrawn, like overnight. The two-sided world of the Cold War vanished, and it gives way to what historians call a unipolar moment. And this new world order got put to the test almost immediately. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, it was the US that led this huge international coalition in the Persian Gulf War. That whole conflict was basically a demonstration of America's new role as the one and only superpower on the block, and it really set the stage for its foreign policy for the rest of the 90s. All right, so we've walked through the what and the how.
But our source material goes a step further and offers a really unique perspective on the why. It looks at all these huge historical events not just through a political lens, but through a theological one. So, for instance, to explain how two rivals like Reagan and Gorbachev suddenly started working together, the source points to this verse from Proverbs. The idea here is that their hearts, their decisions, were being guided by a divine hand, redirected away from conflict, just like a stream of water. And then they use this verse to explain the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. The argument from this perspective is that the USSR didn't just fall because of a bad economy, it fell because of its pride, this haughty spirit that, according to the proverb, always comes before a fall.
So, in the end, how do you see it? A chain reaction of political events? A story of economic collapse? Or a lesson in pride and consequence? Whatever your take, the end of the Cold War wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. It just slammed one book shut and threw open a new one that was way more unpredictable. And it leaves us with the big question we're still trying to figure out today. What on earth came next?